Jenn Curtis is an educational consultant, a best-selling author, and a professional speaker. As the owner of FutureWise Consulting, she has worked with hundreds of students throughout the United States on every aspect of the college admission process. She's particularly passionate about empowering teens to approach life with intention and educating parents about using the parent compass. She's also the founder of FutureWise Collective, a digital college counseling program aimed at helping seniors navigate the college application process with confidence. Jenn's book, The Parent Compass, Navigating Your Teen's Wellness and Academic Journey in Today's Competitive World, offers parents advice on fostering grit and resilience to help kids and teens approach their life with purpose. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome Jenn Curtis to the show.
All right, you guys, I'm so excited about today's guest, Jenn Curtis. We've been friends for such a long time. Our kids are in school together, and I just am so interested in the work that she is doing. She wrote the book, The Parent Compass, and she has a master in social work. And I think, Jenn, your mission is so big and so important right now, even in just some of the stats I was reading in your book of the number of teenagers between the ages of 13 and 17 with anxiety and depression. That Pew Research survey, 70% of kids cited anxiety or depression as a major concern. And this was pre-COVID. So, I mean, my whole body has chills. Your message is so important. I want all the moms and dads tuning in to get it before their kids are in high school. If their kids are, in junior high and high school, to turn the volume up and tune in right now, because this is really important stuff. So thank you for donating an hour of your time to the Be Well by Kelly podcast and for being here and just for the work that you're doing.
Well, Kelly, I'm so excited to be here. This is honestly just so thrilling for me. So thank you so much. I love sharing this message because I think that it is something that parents of kids of all ages can be paying attention to. I think, if we have younger kids, it's a message that we can be planning ahead and really attuning to our kids' needs so that we can have that relationship that we want to have with them. And then I also love telling parents that even if some of the strategies that we're probably going to talk about today and that are in the Parent Compass, even if you haven't been employing those and your kid is 16 or 17, it is never ever too late. And what we wanted to accomplish, one of the things we wanted to accomplish with the Parent Compass was digestible strategies that could if you read the book over a weekend, you could employ those strategies on Monday and you would start to see results. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here and share this message with your audience.
Yeah, no, I mean, you have these amazing just action steps that we can take as parents, to give our kids autonomy and to build resilience and confidence, and just that they're their own little person and they have their own little voice and strength. And that's really powerful. I love it. And I can't wait for people to hear about it, but I want them to know where you came from, how you got here, and why you wrote this book.
So I am an educational consultant. And so basically I help guide students and their families through the high school years and through the college admission process. My background is in social work. And so I'm very passionate about mental health treatment. And so much of what I do as an educational consultant is infused with this mental health lens. And that's what I really love about my work, is that I can, work with these students as they are preparing to apply for college, but also be talking about these very, very important mental health issues that they need to be aware of so that when they get to college, they can thrive. So the idea of the Parent Compass, actually, the catalyst was the Operation Varsity Blues scandal, or the college admission scandal. That was in.
I don't know about that. What is that?
So that was in March of 2019. And basically what it boiled down to was there was a mastermind, I will say in quotes, college counselor who was urging people to use fraud and bribery to get their kids into college. And it was splashed all over the media and honestly was heartbreaking. to watch. And so my co-author, Cindy Muchnick, and I started to have these really real conversations about what we were seeing in our offices, what was happening. Certainly we were not seeing fraud and bribery, but we were seeing kids who were coming into our offices who were voiceless, who were listless, who didn't know how to schedule their own appointments. They had no voice. And maybe what's more important is that their relationships with their parents were not great. And they had no self-advocacy skills. But at the same time, we were also really noting these parenting behaviors that seem to really result in happy, well-adjusted, thriving teens and really positive parent-teen relationships. And then we were also noticing that there were so many parents who were craving these tools to support their teens, but because everybody around them was frantically tutoring and managing and helicoptering, they didn't know how to do that. So the Parent Compass was born because we really were compelled to get this message out and help parents understand their appropriate role when navigating those tween and teen years amidst a really hyper-competitive academic environment.
Ooh, and I think it's that hyper competitive academic environment that makes parents feel out of control, and they overcorrect and they over edit and they helicopter and they step in and they speak for their kids. I mean, I will say, like, if you have a junior high kid, or even like, I think like third, fourth, fifth grade, like this already is such a tool that I can be implementing with Sebastian at 3.5, just to start, because it's all practice. I think, parents are definitely craving these tools. If you look online in my space, in the toddler space, people like Janet Lansbury, Dr. Becky Kennedy, she's been on the show, Big Little Feelings, like courses, things that are like, okay, you don't know how to do this. Your parents probably said, no, you're not getting that. That's just because, or that was their reason. And now we have these, I wouldn't know I'd be lost on how to communicate appropriately to like give my children autonomy and make them feel seen, but then also hold boundaries. And you're like, there has to be a formula for this. I love a formula. I love light structure. I love like, don't tell me black and white. Right? Yeah, like everything, like you feel empowered by a little bit of light structure and a little bit of tools to create, to do this. So let's dive in, because you tell a lot of stories in the book of like examples of parents. What does it look like when a child doesn't have self-advocacy? And what are some of those parenting pitfalls that you see? Because and I don't know if it's a term in your world, but like a snowflake child. Can you tell me what it means to, what does that term mean? Who are those kids? And what are the behaviors of their parents?
So in the introduction to the Parent Compass, that was extremely easy for me to write. Honestly, you are an author yourself. So there are certainly parts of books that are so difficult. And then there are some that are like, oh, I can write this all day long. And the reason it was easy to write was because I think this image came to mind of a specific time where I had a student sitting in my office. And I think it was the best example of exactly what you're asking about. The student was sitting across from me. She was with her mom. And all of a sudden I'm realizing, goodness, it's been about 10 plus minutes and I have not heard this girl say one word. And we were there obviously to talk about her journey, where she's at, what are her interests. I do ask every student in the beginning of every introductory session, what do you love to do? Because my job is to help bring that out of them and help them get involved in other things where they can explore. And I realized that this mom had been blabbering on and on and on about comparing this girl to her sister and what the sister had accomplished and blah, 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 blah. And so finally I stopped the mom and I said, hey, can we go back? Can you tell me, like, what do you love to do? What makes you excited? And she couldn't answer my question. She sat there, she panicked, she looked at her mom, she did like eke out, "Mom," and started bawling. And so I realized, oh my goodness, this girl has never spoken for herself. And I think that's one example, but I see that a lot. And going back to what you were saying earlier about how we can employ these things with our kids, it is examples like that that have really impacted my parenting of my younger kids. So I'm huge on trying to teach kids self-advocacy skills, even when they're toddlers, because I think that there are really certain age appropriate ways that we can do that. So one of the ways that I like to do that I think is really benign and pretty easy is that our kids know that from the moment they were able to like clearly articulate themselves, when we went to restaurants, they had to order for themselves. They had to look the server in the eye. They had to articulate what it was that they wanted. If they wanted coloring pages, I didn't want to color, so I wasn't going to ask for them. They needed to ask. Or if they wanted more water, they needed to do that. And I think what that does is that when we normalize that they can speak up for themselves, they learn self-advocacy skills even at that young age. And then that also translated to going to the doctor. So we go to the doctor and they know that they get a first pass. I may be sure, like my daughter, my youngest one is now 6. She can't totally explain everything, but she can tell the doctor that she has a headache, or she can tell the doctor that she, hurt her arm or whatever it is. And I don't need to do that. And I don't need to take that away from her. So the doctor became another place. And I think the more that we can recognize those benign situations where they can practice and they can get the words, then that does translate to those tween and teen years when they do need to ask a teacher for something. They do need to discuss a grade with a teacher. They do need to talk to their coach or maybe an administrator or some other adult that they're uncomfortable talking with. They've had that experience for a long time. And maybe we need to role play with them, or maybe we need to, give them the words to be able to do that. But they've had a long practice. So that they, feel more comfortable, and that's kind of been normalized for them.
So it's such a good example, because that's something I'm sure the moms listening are like, oh, well, now I know when I go to the restaurant, that's a trigger for me. Like, I love triggers for my clients, because then it becomes automatic and it becomes habitual for them to say, oh, this is a specific place where I let my child talk. It's not a new environment or a new situation where you just want to take over and help them, but to allow them to get that practice in. When it comes to self-advocacy, at what age, because that leads into the snowflake thing of, okay, well, if a child is a snowflake, what does that mean? And because you had examples in the book around kids, parents talking to coaches, parents talking to teachers or administrators, really doing the advocacy for their kid to try and get them ahead, or, something like that. So when it comes to like, when is it age appropriate to say, oh, you didn't like that? I'll give you an example. Bash is at camp right now. It's literacy camp, because Chris wanted one at academic camp this summer, and it's 5 days. It's 2 hours a day. He's there right now from 11 to 1. And he is the youngest in the class. It is 4-year-olds to 6-year-olds, like kindergarten prep. And he said, when he got in the car, he said, I loved it. It was so fun, Mommy. And I said, great. What went well, what was hard? And he's like, it was really hard. All the kids got to use markers, but Maverick and I had to use colored pencils. And I'm assuming this is because she doesn't trust my 3.5-year-old, who is pretty verbal, but wanted to do this class because he's the youngest, that she doesn't trust him with markers on her table. So in that situation, he said, can you text her? Can you call her? Can you tell her that I can use markers, that I use markers at home? And I'm like, yeah, next time I drop you off, I'll float the idea, and they'll see, like, at what point am I saying, well, why don't you have the conversation with Miss Julie about that you're old enough to use markers, and ask her politely if you can use them?
Yeah.
That's like what I want to tell him to do.
Well, I honestly, it depends on the child. And I do think I get this question a lot too, because it's like, well, my child is really shy. And then I don't want to, I did an interview on Self-Advocacy a few weeks ago. Actually, it was a couple months ago. And she was like, I don't want to sit there in like a restaurant or something. And I'm that parent that is making life miserable for everybody because I'm sitting there waiting for my kid to speak up and they're not. But I think your child. And so I think there are different instances where you feel like it'll work or it won't work. I personally do urge my kids, even when they were younger, to take a first pass, like for something like that, to take a first pass at the teacher and say like, hey, I would really love to use markers. And I do it at home. And if that doesn't work, I think role playing can work, because I think it gives kids the exact, and I would probably actually role play before he does it, because then you can give him the exact words and he's practiced them and he's confident. And then if that doesn't work, then you can step in. But I think I like to say that self-advocacy is a learned skill and it takes time. I honestly, I'm someone where it does not come naturally to me. It does not come naturally to me to confront people or stick up for myself. And so it's really in watching my students over so many years. It's something that I've really had to prioritize even in my own life. So I do like students and parents to know that it is a learned skill. It takes time. I think also your role in self-advocacy will kind of change over time as a parent. And I do think if we're talking about when is it appropriate to step in, I think your tweens and teens should be able at that point to go in and speak to teachers on their own. I am a firm believer that at that age, you really should not be overstepping and going to teachers first, much less skipping over teachers and going to administration. I think students should be taking the first pass at that. But I also think that, if there's ever any issues of danger or impropriety, then parents really should be getting involved. But I think this all goes back to the fact that letting them speak up really does them a service. It empowers them. That's where they get their confidence from. I really do believe that self-advocacy and confidence are very much tied. When they know that their voice is important and that it matters, then their confidence grows. And it's so fun to watch as a parent, I think.
Oh, I mean, I would agree with you. Just even watching Bash order at a restaurant, I'm like, oh, that's like, the first couple of times it's like he's stumbling over his words or he like whispers it to me. And, you don't want to be like, he can't hear you, but like, you're like, great. Yeah, he'll have that. And I'll just like repeat it. It's like just those little practices, but I love that. Like, I feel, I mean, I'm sure parents listening would feel the same. You feel so proud of your children when they are doing things by themselves. My first experience of that has been in the kitchen with a kid's kitchen tower and really getting that's where I teach my kids everything, like colors, flavors, crunch, counting. Like, I'm like, you want to learn something? Legos are cool, but come in mom's kitchen. Like, I just have way more fun in there. So that's my happy place. And I think wherever anyone else's happy place is, if you're like, I want to color because I love coloring, like whatever it is, like that makes us all feel really good. But let's catch people up. What does it mean to be this term, a snowflake? Like, what is this problem that's happening right now? And who is it happening to and why?
So I think if we go back to the example of that young girl, I think it's that fragility. It's the inability to articulate, what's important to them, their values, who they are. And I think it's those kids whose parents have spoken up over them, for them, the parents who have run in to fix everything and haven't given them the opportunity to fix their own problems. It's the kids who don't know how to fail. They don't know, I will say that the kids that I am continually just mind boggled by, like these kids that are just so thriving, those are the kids that truly do articulate to me that I love a good failure. I love when I fall flat on my face and I learn that I did this wrong and this wrong and this wrong, and I can do it so much better next time. And we can get into the whole idea of like, what is a growth mindset and what is a fixed mindset if we want to. But I think the bottom line is that the kids who are kind of in that snowflake category aren't the ones, they avoid failure. They don't look at failure as a way to grow and as a thing to maybe be celebrated. They look at it as, oh my gosh, my life is ending. So I think the parenting comes into it because I will say, I think the vast majority of us want the best for our kids. We all want the very best for them. But wanting the very best for them, I think, can sometimes get in the way because we don't give them the opportunities to explore like we should and fail and make mistakes. We get in their way.
Because we get involved and we try to fix it. Well, I love Carol Dweck. I love everything that she talks about and stands for. I mean, I made mention of her in my first book. That's how much I love Carol Dweck and a growth mindset. And so how do we cultivate failure in our kids? Like, how do we get them excited about failure? What are we praising? Because I don't know. It's really easy as a parent to be like, great job. You did it. You learned how to swim, or you learned how to ride a bike. And it's not like you fell off your bike. That's not the stuff you innately praise. So
you fell off your bike.
Yeah. I'm normally screaming. I'm like, are we going to the dentist? Is your tooth slammed into the top roof of your mouth? Gosh, I'm mom of boys. I'm like, that's going to cause everybody to drink a lot of wine. So scary. Yeah. So
what's the language around that?
Teach us how to do that, because that's what I want. I want my kids to be super resilient. I remember a quote an interview with Sarah, I think Blakely, the founder of Spanx. And she said that her dad, every day when her and her brother came home, I think it was her brother came home, he would ask, what'd you fail at today? What'd you learn? And she said she never would have ever started Spanx. And I mean, she's one of the most successful women in the United States to date, the most philanthropic, such an amazing woman. And I look at that and I'm like, how do I repeat what her dad did?
So, okay, I'll answer this in two parts. So the first part, let's tackle the question part. So there actually is a whole section in the Parent Compass where we do give questions for parents to ask their tweens, teens, and frankly, younger kids as well. It was intended kind of to replace that, so how was your day? Because that doesn't ever go anywhere. And we know that, but it comes out naturally. I mean, I still do it all the time. Okay, everyone, how's your day? And I'm met with silence.
Great, fine.
It was fine. And so the questions are in there to elicit conversation, to elicit dialogue, which then again, is going to help our kids feel understood and help them feel like we're really present with them in the moment. I love this anecdote that we give, similar to the one that you just gave. So Izzy Rabi, who's a Nobel laureate, he comes out and he talks about how when he would get home from school every day, while all the other moms were asking their kids, how did your test go? Or how was your day? His mom would ask, did you ask a good question today? And he very much credits that to all that he has accomplished. And so I think, so I would urge parents to check out the list of questions that we have in the Parent Compass. I like, even just for the younger kids, who did you sit next to at lunch today? Or who told the funniest joke today? Or what did you fail at today? Or what do you think you did well today? I think those are great ones. So then the second part of this is kind of how do we have that language behind growth mindset versus fixed mindset. How do we instill grit and resilience in our teens and tweens and even younger kids? And I think it's by, there's a whole chapter in the book called Praise the Journey, Not the Destination. And the point was to really focus on the effort over the outcome. This all does come from Carol Dweck's research on the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. So as parents, when we're reinforcing a growth mindset, we're really normalizing mistakes. We're teaching that they're a really potent way to learn. It's a way to really instill critical self-advocacy skills, their ability to speak up for themselves, ask for help when they need it, and even seek hard to hear constructive criticism. We recognize and praise them for what they did to master a task rather than focusing really narrowly on the achievement. So we might focus on the time that it took for them to seek extra help from a teacher, or from the hours of preparation they put into a project, or, bettering their time in some sort of an athletic feat, basically their diligence, instead of maybe a certain grade. And so they learn that if they work on their intelligence, that they can be growing in it. And then when they make a mistake, they can welcome and they can embrace that mistake, and they can then look at it as an opportunity to analyze it and look at what they can do better next time. But what I love the most about what Carol Dweck says is that she really urges parents and teens and tweens and kids to embrace the word yet. Meaning, I can't do that yet. And I think as parents, we can make that a part of our kids' vocabularies, is that they can be working on whatever it is they're working on, and maybe they can't do it, but it's just that they can't do it yet. A fixed mindset, on the other hand, is a lot more rigid. So we're focusing more on awards and recognition. There's an anecdote that I give in the book about a parent acquaintance that posted all over social media once that her child had won a swim meet. And so as a result, she bought her a cat. And so something like that is really going to be reinforcing that fixed mindset. I'm either athletic, or I'm not, or I'm either smart or I'm not. And it's not something that I can grow in. It's much more of a rigid fixed mindset. And so when we are focusing on the growth mindset, we're really teaching kids to approach challenges with intrigue and curiosity. And again, to see failure not as an endpoint, but really as a stepping stone, and to love learning for the sake of simply gathering knowledge.
Oh, I love that. Simple as 3 letters, yet. It reminds me a little bit of this Mommy and Me class I took, where you'd have to go around the circle and say, what's going well, what's not going great. And instead of labeling your kids, you would have to say, Sebastian isn't sleeping well right now, but Sebastian's learning to crawl right now. It's kind of like this idea that if you label your children and that neural pathway just gets, you think that over and over and over again, it's almost like you're labeling your kids in a place where they can't unlabel themselves. And there's that growth again. But I love that. Yet I'm going to use it. So many things that Bash wants to do that he can't do yet.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating for him. He wants to be a big kid, but he's so small. He can't use the
phone yet.
Okay. So when it comes to your experience with working with kids, getting ready for college, what are some of the things that we can do as parents to check in with ourselves, and maybe what might be, I don't want to say like built-in machinery. We might need a software upgrade from like how we were raised, but how do we check in with ourselves and our own experience, and then ensure that we're not getting caught up in that rat race of competitivity with our neighbors' kids and what they're doing and their grades and what's like really right for our kids?
Okay, I love that you asked this. So there is a chapter called Take a Walk Down Memory Lane. And interestingly enough, this chapter was actually, so it comes at the beginning of the book. It's chapter 2. And the interesting part is it was actually the very last chapter that we wrote. So we finished the whole book. The book came out in 2020, which obviously we all know, I don't have to repeat what happened to us in 2020. And so we had to go through, and we had to make sure, first of all, that the book was reflected where the world was at that time. And interestingly enough, we actually made, I honestly think, like one change. So we were really confident that it was an evergreen book, no matter what was going on in our world. All of these strategies that we're giving to parents were, would be relevant no matter what the situation.
Timeless. Totally.
Thank you. So in doing so, we realized this huge chasm that we were asking parents to adopt these strategies and really rethink their parenting behavior and be attuned to their kids. But we actually had never asked them to take a moment to look at the root of their parenting and the way that they were brought up, which in so many ways, as we all know, influences how we raise our children. And so we came up with this inventory of sorts, where we ask them to think through, if they have a partner, they can discuss it with their partner, how academics and education were treated in their home, what kind of student they were, what was their personality, and then to go into thinking through, like, how is their personality different or complementary to their child's personality, and how does that play out in the dynamics. So we created these questionnaires. There's a parent questionnaire, and then there's also a teen questionnaire, and we tested them out. And so we asked parents to, as I said, kind of go through them, if they have a partner, with a partner, or another trusted adult. And then also to go through these questionnaires with their children. And the point was that we really wanted, obviously, first and foremost, to open up these lines of communication. So again, to give students and their parents structure and words to use when they are trying to talk about some big, heavy topics. But I think just as importantly, we really wanted to have parents be able to be vulnerable and to show humility. And so by coming to their kids with these questionnaires, and we actually found this to be true. And the people that we had a large sample of people who tested them out. And what we got back was that when they went to their kids with humility and they said, look, I want the best relationship with you that I can. I would like to go through these questionnaires and discuss them so that I can learn, what am I doing well? How can I better support you? What can we work on so that we can make sure that our relationship remains intact, as we're going through these difficult tween and teen years? So we found them actually to be really effective. And so then this actually all does come back to that idea of competitive parenting that you brought up. So competitive parenting kind of means, it's the idea that, like, if my kid accomplishes something, somehow what they accomplish reflects what a great parent I am. And our own ego gets tied up into what we might push our kids into. But reality, what my kid accomplishes has absolutely nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with them and how hard they have worked and what they have, put into whatever that accomplishment is. And so I will say I am certainly not immune to this. I really have to keep myself in check and constantly be asking myself to take a walk down memory lane so that I can really take an inventory of, like, why does it matter to me if my kid is, I don't know, looked at a certain way or at the top of their class or whatever it is in the moment. So I think that's kind of how it goes back to competitive parenting.
Just take a minute, review how you were raised and what was important to your family. Chris and I come from we're very similar backgrounds, and then we were raised in like the same neighborhood and area, and we're about like middle-class families, like our parents I feel so blessed, and I know I'm privileged that our parents were married for so long and really involved in our lives. But our parents had they both cared about education, but Chris's parents were teachers, and they cared so deeply about his education and, how smart he was, and they instilled that in him. And he is so smart, and my dad was like, C's for degrees or whatever gets you into college. And so it was a completely different sitting down, I think, and looking at report cards with each of our parents and having that experience was different. And so even today, when we have these conversations about college, I'm like, if our kids don't want to go to college, if I've taught them how to be their own people in the world, I could care less. And he's like, you are crazy. Like they have to have that, because that sets them apart in the world competitively. Like if they did want to have a career, and if they did want to, work for a big corporation or whatever it may be. And so I see what he's saying, and I value education, but I think I look at my life and what I learned in school and what I use today. And a lot of it is keeping up with the science, being self-taught, working with other people in my industry to learn and continue to learn. And so I think about how it hasn't served me in the way in my career. So for something like an example like that, how would you take inventory of our backgrounds, and what advice would you have if we came to you and Bash is going into college, you're like, oh gosh, polar opposites, yin and yang here. What are we going to do?
Honestly, I think you've done the hard work. It sounds like these are things that you guys have explored and you've talked about, and you're willing to, meet in the middle. And I honestly think that the communication piece truly is half the battle. That's why the questionnaires are in there, because I think so much of the time these conversations don't happen. We don't talk with our partner enough about intentionally, what can I do to better support you, much less our kids. I don't know that, unless we're really, really thinking about it, I think the vast majority of us don't sit down with our kids and say, okay, how can we better this? So honestly, my answer is, I think that you guys, in opening up those lines of communication and simply being aware of the fact that you were brought up differently, and you do have, different perspectives on education, but also then identifying where's the overlap. It's a Venn diagram, where do you guys meet, and then parenting from that place.
Definitely. It is interesting, because it's two things can be true, right? It's I do value education. It's not that I don't value education or my education. I had a great education. It was phenomenal. I very much valued my college experience at USC and the extended education I did after that. But I equally value, or maybe more value, the autonomy and the grit and the resilience that my parents taught me from a place of entrepreneurship, because it's afforded me the ability to start and build my own business, which, if that wasn't an example for me growing up, I don't know that I'd know how to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're such a great example of fearlessness and, stepping out there and doing what makes you happy. I remember, I'll tell the world, I do remember talking with you at a baby shower years ago, and you were just leaving your old job. I'll never forget the conversation, because you were so excited, and it was so clear that you were going after your passion. You told me about how in high school, I really do. I remember the conversation. You said that in high school, your favorite thing to do was tell your friends what's healthy and what's not. And you were like, this is what I need to do. And you did it. And look what you've done. I think that is going to, just your role modeling of that. I think sometimes as parents, we can kind of look past what our role modeling, good and bad, is teaching our kids, because they are always watching us, always.
And you just put them on pause for a second.
Yeah.
No, but modeling the failures and modeling the falls,
Yeah.
modeling all of that
Yeah.
is
And so like when you do, even if it's a failure in, I'm not just talking about you, but anybody, even if you do have a failure, even in your work life, like sometimes I do try to point that out to particularly my older daughter who can understand it a little bit better. And I talk about like, gosh, I could have done this better. And we do talk about what that felt like for me and how I can change it, because I want her to understand that she can think through those things too.
Oh, that's really beautiful and good to just be reminded of that, because I think our kids probably look at us and they're like, they already know how to ride a bike and swim. Like they're perfect. You know, I mean, I remember thinking my parents were impermeable and just
Yeah.
godly, you're like, whoa, they're so cool and amazing, but just to remind them that we're still growing and learning too.
Yeah.
So I love the self-advocacy at a restaurant, at the doctor. I love talking about failures and experiences and things that you could do, kind of like ways that you would do over something with your kids when they're old enough. What are some like other daily things that we can do to bring our family together?
Okay, a few things. So actually the first thing that came to mind when you started to ask that question, a couple more tips that I like to give just for teaching kind of the confidence and the self-reliance for younger kids. Something that I really like to do is really giving them power over their room. I know it sounds silly, but for one of my daughter's birthdays, we just redid her room for her as like a gift. And oh my gosh, she like, it was great. And then she brought out all of her trinkets, and her trinkets are just like everywhere. It's just like clutter mess. And I just standing there watching like, oh my gosh, like, but it's her space and she loves it. She thinks it's fantastic. And so I just have to close the door and zip my lips and let that be her space. Or another thing is letting them dress themselves. Sometimes it is cringeworthy what my kids put themselves in, but they think that they are rocking it and they should. So I think that's another easy one. And then one of my favorite ones is actually letting them pack for themselves. So if we go away for just a weekend or on a vacation, I do have my kids pack for themselves, and they've done it enough now that even my 6-year-old can fully pack for a week-long vacation for herself. It wasn't always that way. I had to obviously guide her, or sometimes like, sneak in a few extra, bathing suits or whatever. But I think what it does is it gives them control over, over the vacation itself, honestly, because sometimes that can even bring up anxiety in kids, but also just, it can get them excited about where they're going and give them the confidence that like they can prepare themselves. They see us packing and they can do it. But then I think the biggest thing, getting back to your question, is family dinner. I think that's a whole part that we have in the Parent Compass. And there is research related to the fact that frequent family dinners are correlated with less engagement in risk behaviors. It is a difficult task, particularly as your kids get older with sports and all the different activities. But what we like families to know that it doesn't have to be dinner. Maybe it's breakfast or something, another time where the whole family can gather during a day. The other thing is if parents are having a difficult time, sometimes I'll hear that parents say like, oh, we'll do the family dinner, but then we get there and nobody knows what to talk about. We love table topics. Our kids really thrive when we can go around and ask questions. Another thing that the research also shows is, and this is something pertinent in my home where my husband is a first responder. And so he's not home a lot. And so we don't trusted maybe grandma is there, then a lot of those risk-taking behaviors can also be mitigated. So family dinners, really important. I think that those can really help to connect and bring families together, and also avoid, other behaviors that maybe we don't want to see in the future.
Yeah. Well, all great tips. I mean, now you have me thinking when I can let Bash pack his next bag. Like, be like 2 shorts, 1 tank top, no underwear, flip flops. Maybe like, we're going to Mammoth, bud. What are we doing here? But just, I mean, like I said, I think it's triggers. It's always like, oh yeah, that reminds me to do something, or to let them do something, and to have that advocacy. You talk a lot in the book about jobs, and like, when is it appropriate to get your kids in, their first job, or not to get it. Like, you're like, hi, I'm going to take you and apply for you to get your first job. No, when should they be earning their keep? When should they be paying rent? Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I am honestly a really firm believer in high school students having jobs. I think even middle school students, obviously they can't work yet, but they can create their own things. They can do a dog walking service, or there are, they can babysit and learn what it's like to earn money. They can even, like, even middle school kids, say you have a middle school kid who loves to play soccer. Great, create a soccer camp for neighborhood kids. Or another example we give in the book is a Star Wars camp. This is something actually my co-authors' kids did. They loved Star Wars. And so they created, and they weren't old enough to work yet. So they created a Star Wars camp, and they did some really fun and creative things, and gave parents in the neighborhood a break when they sent their kids off. As far as high school is concerned, I'm a huge fan of high school students having jobs. I think that it really, really gives these critical life skills that you can only learn by being, being in front of people. And again, going back to self-advocacy skills, asking your boss for a day off, or showing up at an interview and having to sell yourself in that interview. That's not easy, and it's not necessarily fun for most people, but they get to experience that, and they get to do that. So I will say that not enough of my students have jobs. I would love if every single one that I worked with had a job, and it's not realistic for everybody necessarily, but when it does fit into the family plan, I think that it can be just such a great thing, and such a great addition to college applications too.
It's interesting because I know a lot of parents who say their job is to get into college at this point. Their job is to get into college, and they have school and they have sports, and they don't have time for a job. What does it look like when you think about a high school student having a job?
It can be any number of things. And honestly, so we are talking about paid jobs, but I have a lot of students who get experience in whatever their intended field is in the form of an internship. And I think honestly, that is just as valuable. And in fact, actually, for certain fields, like maybe an engineering field or a computer science field, an internship is actually really necessary, because you want them to be able to explore those fields before they get to college, and lo and behold, they're an engineer. And oh man, I thought I was going to like this, and I don't, so I think it can look like an internship if we're kind of going to bend the term of job a little bit, but it depends, it really does all come back to balance, and whatever every family's values are, because sure, for some families, they're super busy, and for some schools or some students who are super, super involved in sports, there just is no time. I mean, I work with some students who row crew, and honestly, like, they're up at 4:30 in the morning, and they don't get home until 9. So yeah, there is no time for a job. And that's even on the weekends as well. So you got to do what's best for your family. Obviously, But if it does fit in, I think that they can really teach a lot of critical skills.
Yeah, I was playing soccer nonstop, but I had to dispatch tow truck drivers for my dad's towing company growing up. And I used to hate it. Like, I mean, it was fun hanging out with my dad because he's funny and he's like a big teddy bear. And it's like Papa B. But the actual work of like sorting receipts, because he used triplicate receipts, and having to like get on a radio and like call out to a driver, answer the phones, was a little bit stressful at that age.
Yeah.
Because you'd have to be like, what are you saying? What off ramp? Like, what am I writing down? And you're like trying to do it as fast as you can and not mess up. I think it was all recorded, so he didn't really worry about it if I missed something. But it really it would have been hard for me with the schedule that I had to have maybe worked at the mall or something, but that was based on how much soccer I was playing. So I was just curious.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just during the summer. So I had a somewhat of a similar situation in the fact that I went to a boarding school for high school. So I was gone. There was no way, we weren't allowed to work. Like we didn't have cars. There's no way that we could get to a job, but I did have to have a job every summer. So sometimes it's just a summer job. Some students do carry them throughout the year. Some get a job and it's only for, 6 to 8 weeks or something. But again, you do what works best for your schedule and for your family.
Definitely. So in reading this book, I think that the theme and the thing that like kept coming up for me is this relationship like you have with your tween or your teen, and that obviously it's a stage and a time in which they are like, mom is no longer cool. I do not want to hang out with her, but also I feel like maybe the parents are the most stressed out about like what their child's future is going to look like. There's examples of like children who were unmotivated academically, and how do we cultivate like the strongest relationship with our kids, but still help them meet their goals? I know this is a huge question, because you're like, I want to have the best relationship ever with my kids, but I also want them to be self-motivated and not hate me. I mean, I don't know.
So I think that, you're asking about connection. How do we connect? So I would say my biggest piece of advice for connecting, and honestly, one of the hardest things to do for me, is to listen. I think that good for us to jump in and give them advice and to fix and have the same letters. And I think that that's just so potent and something that I really try to keep in mind. But it's so hard. It is so hard, partially because of those endorphins. But I think that what we need to be remembering is that what feels empowering to them, and ergo makes us connected to them, is that when we sit alongside them and we let them figure it out themselves and we watch them try, that's where the connection comes from. I'll never forget, speaking of sitting alongside and watching students, one of the students that I look up to maybe the most, she was just really, she had it together. She was truly thriving. And I do like to pick up parenting tips as much as I can, much like you, in all the work that I do. And so this was years ago, but I remember sitting with her at the very end of our working together. And I said, you know what? I just have to know, like, what did your parents do? And she looked at me and did not skip a beat. And she said, they made me do hard things. And she really it was so clear to me that she really respected them for that. And she really respected that they just sat along the sidelines and they listened and they watched while she did these hard things. And they didn't try to jump in and fix, they just watched. And they helped her when she needed the help, when she asked for the help. But that's something that I just really like to keep in mind, because it's something that I'm not always good at. I do like to jump in and say like, oh, well, you should do this, or you should think about this. But I try to remind myself to zip my lips.
No, I mean, I know exactly, like probably could flip to the exact page where you talk about being fully present with your kids and listening and not jumping in and not correcting, not helping. It's like, kind of reminds me of my relationship with Chris, or I'm sure most people would think about like their spouse or maybe even their boss, where someone wants to save you and jump in and fix it. And you're like, no, I just need you to listen and like empathize, and then let me talk it out and figure it out. And it's maybe that practice with each other that will help us with our kids.
Absolutely. And I think just practicing even just those active listening skills. So the nodding and the mm-hms and and we actually go through what active listening skills are and how to do those. But also just eliciting conversations from our teens just by saying, or kids, and our spouse by saying, oh, tell me more about that. I want to hear more about that. Those are things that help them to feel that we are in the moment with them, and they keep us in the moment with them. If we have to actively listen, then we are right there with them, and we don't start thinking about our cell phone that just dinged or the 85 things that we have on our to-do list. We have to be there, and they really can feel that to the core.
So special. Like, now I need to go read the active listening again so I can be even better at this podcast. Like, any help I can get here. Not a radio host, just like to talk to my friends and learn something. Okay. Well, I think I'd love to ask like one more question, because I do feel like you've had so many years being an expert in this and seeing kids come through. And I'm sure you have those stories, like the young lady who you want to know, what did your parents do? But what's something you really hope that the parents listening hear from you?
So I am a very firm believer in tangible reminders. I think as you call them triggers. So I would call them tangible reminders. And I did in the Parent Compass. And there are a few that I like to use. So for myself, I wear a compass necklace because I really, it is what grounds me. It is what reminds me when I am jumping into fix, or I am not seeing my child for who she is, but who I want her to be. When I catch myself, it's just my tangible way of reminding, it's okay to get off course sometimes, but I need to correct. But my other big tangible reminder is that I give all of my students a set of earplugs. And I tell them when I give them those earplugs that what I want them to pack it away in maybe their backpack or a pencil holder or a locker. And it is their way to drown out the noise, to drown out the competition, and to look at those earplugs and remember what it is that makes them, what it is that makes them unique and special. And likewise, I urge parents to adopt that concept of earplugs, whether it is going out and physically getting a pair of earplugs, or maybe it's something like a compass necklace. But really having something tangible that they see that can remind them. I want to focus on what makes my family special. I want to focus on what makes my child special. And I want to always keep the long view of parenting in mind, what I want our relationship to look like in 5 years and 10 years, and parent from that place more than in the moment of grades and test scores or the name of a specific college. That I think can really help to reframe our responses to almost any situation that we come up with, that comes up with our kids.
It's interesting to me because what you're talking about, I feel like is a theme in so many, even just business books and relationship books, whether it's like marriage or your own business. It's like this place of like gratitude, of presence, and gratitude for all of your child's gifts, everything that they are, and feeling just more abundant around it instead of having low vibe energy, really. And so you're creating that in your relationship with your kids. And I think when you start to live that way, there's probably no way, it's probably the easiest way to be really positive in the way you communicate to one another and in your relationship.
Yeah. Well said.
Jenn, everyone needs to get out their phone or go to a bookstore and get the Parent Compass. This was so wonderful. All of your questionnaires and tips for active listening or triggers or whatever it is to get parents to allow their children to self-advocate, to get out there and to get confident by failing, to praise the activity or the journey and not the destination, to model failures and how you may want to do things differently and how that made you feel, show your humility and your humanity to your kids. Don't really care where they go to college. No, I'm just kidding. They don't need to go.
There is a college for everyone. There is a college for everyone.
No, but such an amazing read, really concise, and it's like a user guide. It truly is in navigating your teen's wellness and academic journey in today's competitive world. Jenn Curtis, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much. I had the best time. This was such a fun conversation.
Me too.